tools, I don't make them, but they're my tools, and they're called Hollow Pro tools. And they use carbide cutters and swivel tips. So I'm going to do a little explanation of my tools. They're designed to fit into any handle with a 5/8 inch opening. Now this is my small tool. This is a 1/2 inch straight tool with a number 1 cutter in it. And one thing I want to point out to this, and it's the same thing with the gouges, you want to be careful where you put the screws. I don't want the screws on the flat part because I want that to slide on the tool rest. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in. I'm going to put the screws on the side of the tool so it doesn't ding up the bottom like that. Now the important thing about using my tools is the tool rest height. And what you want is you want to get it so that you're cutting right on that center line and the tool handle either being perfectly straight, even with the lathe, or slightly raised, but never drop the tool handle down. That's very important. And I also got the bigger tools I'm going to show you. My bigger tools are turned down on a lathe so that they're 5/8, and they're not important as to how you put them in. That's a little easier. You can go ahead and put these in any way you want. You don't need to worry because that part is not going to be on the tool rest. So we'll start out, I'll show you these 2 straight tools, and then we'll play around a little bit with the bent tools. All right. You'll see how easy this is to use. This is actually easier than a bowl gouge. Now, this thing has moved a little bit since I did it. I was teaching a class with this. But you can see that if you anchor yourself down and remember the things I told you about holding it with your body and bending your knees, this is a very, very easy tool to use. Now watch this. You can cut from either direction with it, really. These tools are so easy, you can just push them straight in. So watch this. This is my 5/8 straight tool. This is a big, strong tool, and I use a number 2 standard cutter on this, and it's very, very aggressive. You'll see what this thing does if I really push into it. You can push it straight in and come from either direction. So this setup right here is the most aggressive tool that I use. That big number 2 cutter with this tool really removes wood very, very quickly. These carbide cutters last a long time. This is a fairly dry piece of wood. If you turn wet wood, you don't even need to think about changing these cutters for maybe 100 bowls like this. This is my 5/8 bent tool. Now bent tools are a lot more difficult to use than straight tools. That's why I mentioned in the beginning in the introduction that I like it when you set yourself up to succeed. By making a shape to practice, or a lot of shapes to practice, where you don't need to get into the bent tools, you'll give yourself a chance to learn before you start making it too difficult on yourself. Now to me, a properly designed bent tool should have the cutter lined up with the handle. And what that means, it's controllable. And the second part of that is you cannot start the bent tool with the bent part on the tool rest. It'll just roll right over in your hand because it's not lined up. So if I was going to make a cut right there, what I have to do is stop and make sure that I have the straight part on the tool rest. And this is very important or you won't be able to hold on to this. So this bent tool will work here. I get a little bit closer. And if this is inside a hollow form, I would be making sure that wherever I wanted to cut, that I was starting on the straight part of the tool rest. So I'll go ahead and make a cut with that and just show you how that works. Put my glasses back on. Again, remember what I told you before. I'm anchored down with my left hand. It's all crucial. This is a difficult tool to use. The other little trick, inside the hollow form, I can't see what I'm doing. Here I can make a cut pretty easily because I can see it. And it's not a problem. But what I do is I turn the tool over so it's at a negative angle like this, and I find the wall like that because this is not very aggressive. So right there it's not cutting much. So if I don't know where the wall is, I bring it over and then I roll down into the cut like this. Now, a little bit about these tools again. Let me explain what I'm doing here. I changed tips. This is a tip that I came up with about a year ago. This tip has the cutter mounted at a negative angle, so it's tipped down right at the tip. Now, my swivel tips don't have anything that sticks up. I call it an internal swivel tip. But we want to make sure is that there's no wood in there before you go to move it. So I'll take something sharp and clean it out a little bit, and then take the compressor and make sure it's ready to move. And then we'll take a number 25 Torx wrench, and I'll take it, and I get to move these swivel tips around to reach in different parts of the bowls, like this. So now I can go back to cutting with this. Okay, this is my smaller bent tool. This is the 1/2-inch bent tool. And the advantage that this would give is that I can get the tool rest closer. If I was making that same cut and it would reach, instead of reaching from where that big one is, I get the chance to make this a little cleaner cut by coming in like this. And what I did is I put the same cutter tip on there. That again is the number 2 negative angle tip. So I'll make a little cut with this just to show you how this tool works. This is probably the most difficult tool that I use in my work because it's a little more severely bent. You see, it's a little easier to use this in one aspect because you do get the tool rest closer. The further you are away from the wood with the tool rest, the more torque you start building up. Now, bent tools are a lot harder to use than straight tools because out here, when you're on a bent tool, when you're cutting, the wood is coming in a circular pattern. You get all this rotational forces going on, and what it wants to do is it wants to rip the tool out of your hand this way. When we're using the straight tool, it's a little bit different because when you use a straight tool, you're down in this area, the wood's making smaller circles, so you get less chance to get it cut. So basically what I'm telling you is do as much as you can with the straight tool, and you only use the bent tools when you have to. Okay, we're back to the straight tool again because I want to show you something. I know I have a lot of choices with my tools, and sometimes it's hard for me to explain to somebody what cutter to use with what tool because it has a lot to do with the wood you're cutting. Sometimes you get away with a bigger cutter if you have nice soft green wood, and sometimes you need to use a smaller one. So what this is the cutter I was using in the bent tool. It's the number 2 that has the additional negative angle. When you use this in the straight tool, it gives you a less aggressive cut, and for some people this is easier to handle. I highly recommend this negative angle cutter tip for the 2 bent tools. It's a little bit optional, you could say, for the straight tool, but let me show you the difference, because I showed you this before with the aggressive number 2. Now we're going to show you with the less aggressive tip. This will take a smaller piece of cut of wood, but it's very good for cleaning up around the bottom. It makes a nice fine little cut. And some people just find this less aggressive tip to be more controllable. Okay, what I have now mounted on the straight tool is one of my scrapers. These scrapers are made out of good high quality M4 powdered metal, which is my favorite material for a scraper. The scrapers work with all 4 tools, and they are the least aggressive cutter for anything that you do with my tools. In fact, even though I can cut pretty cleanly with the carbide, when I make my work that's thin and has all the defects in it, I don't want to make the last cut with the carbide because you can go right through it if you're not paying attention. So what I do is I go to these scrapers for the final wall thickness cuts. And this is very easy to control, and I'll show you. We'll go ahead and clean up some of the bottom with this. I'm going to show it to you in my 5/8 inch straight tool, but the scrapers work really well with all 4 of the tools, and I highly recommend the scrapers. You'll see what a small little cut this thing will really take. The easiest of all my cutters to use. Now this is a chance for you to watch what I'm doing. And we can pretend this is the bottom of a hollow form, so you can see I've got that little nub down there. So this is what I'll do when I'm in the hollow form. I come up underneath and cut over this direction like this. And that'll work pretty well on the bottom of the hollow form to get rid of that. This is my 1/2 inch straight tool. This is probably the most versatile tool in my set. And this is with the M4 powdered metal scraper on it. The scraper works great with all 4 tools. It's a very non-aggressive cut, easy to control, really good for final cuts and for finishing up the bottom. They're very small though, and I want to show you how you can safely sharpen these without getting your fingers too close to the grinder. So what I'll do is I take a little diamond credit card sharpener, and instead of sharpening these on the grinder, what I do is I lay the bevel of the cutter down and I just roll it over like this. And I'll turn it around. And that puts an edge right back on it quickly. If you try to take your hone and come up like this, you'll probably round the corner off. And I find that laying this down and doing it this way is a very easy, quick way to put the edge back on this. Remember, most of my tools use these carbide cutters, but this is M4, which is powdered high-speed steel, powdered metal, so it does lose its edge a lot faster than the carbide, so you do need to sharpen these. Most of the time when I'm working on a big piece, I'll have 4 or 5 of these little scrapers sharpened, ready to go. But this is the safe way to sharpen them.
I got a heart of steel and a mouthful of mercury. I got a 2-bit job just trying to make ends meet. I got a strong determination, real good inclination to lend a hand and stand on my own 2 feet.